It started as an ordinary morning. A quiet apartment. A woman getting ready for the day. A child playing nearby. Nothing out of the ordinary. Nothing that would suggest what was about to happen. But then, something changed. A door slammed. Voices rose. A child listened, his small hands clenching, his heart pounding. And then, silence. Minutes later, he stood outside a locked bathroom door. His mother was inside. But something was wrong. He pressed his ear against the wood. Nothing. He crouched, peering through the gap beneath the door. That's when he saw them. His mother's feet. Still, lifeless. And then came the voice behind him. Go check on your mom. The boy hesitated. His tiny fingers gripped the handle. He pushed the door open. And what he saw next would change everything. Within hours, police arrived. A conclusion was drawn. A tragic end, a closed case, no further questions. But what if they were wrong? Because sometimes, the truth is right in front of us. Sometimes, the story we're told is the one someone wants us to believe. And sometimes, the person standing beside you holds the answers you've been searching for. This is the story of April Holt, a mother, a fighter, a woman who was ready to start a new chapter. 14 days after she filed for divorce, she was dead. And the one person who knew the truth, was just 7 years old. If your child came to you with a story no one believed, would you fight to uncover the truth? Let me know in the comments. Before we continue, we welcome you to our channel, True Crime Zone HQ. Thank you to all our viewers and a special shout out to our subscribers for your continued support. Together, we strive to improve and bring you daily updates on both told and untold true crime stories. Please don't forget to hit the subscribe button if you haven't. April Holt was not just a name in a police report. She was a mother, a daughter, a friend. A woman with dreams and ambitions, someone who believed in building her own future, one lash at a time. Born in 1994, April grew up in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, a place that blended small-town familiarity with the promise of opportunity. The kind of town where people knew their neighbors, where front porches carried whispered conversations late into the evening, and where tragedy felt distant. She was more than just a mother, she was a woman with drive, vision, and purpose. April had built a career as a lash technician, turning her passion for beauty into a business that thrived. She didn't just do lashes, she taught. She inspired others to chase their own goals, to take control of their futures. And people listened. On social media, she was a force, her following stretching beyond her Tennessee roots, reaching hundreds of thousands. Over 200,000 people tuned in for her motivational videos, clips where she spoke about resilience, about pushing through challenges, about believing in something greater than the struggles of today. She had seen hardships. She had experienced loss. But she refused to be defined by them. She wanted more, not just for herself, but for her children. She had two, Serenity, her young daughter from a previous relationship, and Denzel, her son with Donovan Holt. Her children were her reason for everything, her late nights, her early mornings, her refusal to quit, even when life threw its worst at her. She was their protector. Their safe place. Their everything. But what happens when the one who spends her life protecting others needs protection herself? Behind the smiles in her videos, behind the messages of hope, there were parts of April's life that weren't shared. Not every battle was meant for public view. And as much as she encouraged others to fight for their dreams, she was quietly preparing for the fight of her own. A fight that, in the end, she wouldn't survive. 14 days before her life was taken, April Holt filed for divorce. It was supposed to be a fresh start. Instead, it became the countdown to her final moments. And the people who should have protected her, the ones who should have looked at the evidence, listened to her son, asked the right questions, chose the easier path. A convenient explanation. A closed case. But those who knew April, those who saw the love she had for her children, the fire she had for her future, knew one thing for certain: April Holt did not give up. So why did the police insist she did? Long before the headlines, before the crime scene photos, before a child's voice became the only one speaking the truth, there was a love story. A story that began with laughter, promises, and dreams of forever. April Holt met Donovan Holt when they were both younger, when life still felt full of possibility. He was charming, confident, the kind of person who knew how to make an impression. For April, who was always working towards something bigger, he felt like a partner in the journey, someone who understood the struggle, the sacrifices, and the ambition it took to build a future. In the beginning, everything seemed right. They were inseparable, a couple that others admired. Love notes. Inside jokes. Late-night talks about where they wanted to be in 5 years. The foundation for something strong. Something lasting. It wasn't long before their relationship turned into a marriage. A shared last name. A home. A son, Denzel, the piece of them that would tie them together forever. From the outside, they had everything. But love, as powerful as it is, doesn't always hold things together. At first, they were small. Easily explained away. A stressful month, an argument that lingered longer than it should, moments of distance that didn't feel so noticeable until they became the new normal. Then came the financial pressure, the late bills, the decisions that weighed heavier with every passing week. The kind of stress that seeps into conversations, into silence, into the moments that used to be effortless. April worked tirelessly, determined to provide not just for herself but for her children. Long hours at her lash business, building something that was hers, something that no one could take away. Donovan, on the other hand, seemed to struggle. The weight of responsibility didn't sit the same way on his shoulders. He had moments of charm, moments where things felt just like they used to, but those moments were getting fewer, replaced with something else. Arguments became a pattern. Long silences stretched between them, and yet, through it all, they held on, if not to each other, then to the image of what they once were. Social media told a different story. The carefully chosen pictures, the videos of them laughing, the glimpses into a life that looked like something others could envy. A couple still in sync. A family still strong. But behind those screens, the reality was slipping further and further from the version they showed the world. April was changing. She was seeing the future not as something to fight for within her marriage, but something she had to build on her own. She had built a business. She had built a brand. And now, she was ready to build a new life. But for some, losing control over something they once had is a loss too great to accept. And for April Holt, making that decision would cost her everything. Have you ever seen a couple that looked perfect on social media but was falling apart in real life? Drop a yes in the comments. April Holt had spent years building something for herself, something tangible, something real. She had grown from a young woman with dreams into a mother and entrepreneur who was making those dreams a reality. But what happens when you realize that the person you thought was standing beside you isn't really standing with you at all? Friends and family had noticed the shift. At first, it was subtle, moments where April seemed distant, less engaged when she spoke about Donovan, less willing to pretend that things were okay. Then, it became clearer. The conversations about love and family had turned into conversations about something else. Freedom. She started speaking about the future in a way she hadn't before. Not in terms of them. Just her. Those closest to her could sense it. April was pulling away. The small fractures in their marriage had widened, becoming something impossible to ignore. And if there was one thing that people like Donovan couldn't handle, it was losing control. But this wasn't just about growing apart. There were rumors. Whispers about infidelity. About control. About a marriage that was not only failing but had been built on a foundation that was far more unstable than anyone had realized. April had started to see the truth, not just about the man she had married but about who he really was when no one else was watching. The arguments became more frequent, more intense. The tension that had once been an underlying presence in their home had now taken center stage. Did April discover something she wasn't supposed to? Or had she simply reached the point where she no longer cared to look away? What is clear is that by July 2023, she had made a decision. One that would set off a chain reaction she never could have predicted. On July 14, 2023, April Holt walked into a courthouse and filed for divorce. It was supposed to be a step toward a new beginning, a life that was fully hers, no longer tied to a marriage that had become something she couldn't fix. But for some, divorce isn't just a legal process. It's the ultimate betrayal. And for Donovan Holt, letting go was never an option. In just 14 days, April Holt would be dead. But was her fate sealed the moment she made that choice? Or had it been decided long before? In the days before her death, April Holt seemed free. She had made her decision. She had signed the papers. She was moving forward. For the first time in years, she was speaking about her future, not theirs. She had always been strong, always independent, but now, there was something else in her voice. Hope. She took to social media, sharing messages about growth, healing, and the power of moving forward. She had over 200,000 followers, strangers who had watched her journey, listened to her words, and found inspiration in her strength. To them, she was proof that even when life breaks you, you can still rebuild. But behind the positivity, behind the uplifting messages, something felt off. Friends noticed the shift. April wasn't just planning for a fresh start. She was rushing toward it. She was speaking about the future with a kind of urgency, making arrangements, setting things in order, as if she knew she didn't have time to waste. Had she felt it? Had she sensed the shift, the tension pressing in around her, the way a storm changes the air before it arrives? Because something had changed. Donovan. The man who had once been so reactive, so quick to anger, was now calm. Too calm. Those who knew him expected rage, denial, a fight. But instead, he seemed collected. Quiet. As if he had already made peace with what was coming. April was ready to move on. But the question was, had Donovan already decided that she never would? 14 days. That was all the time she had between signing the papers and taking her final breath. Was he watching her every move? Waiting for the right moment? Or had the decision already been made? Because the thing about control is, some people will do anything to keep it, even if it means making sure that the person trying to break free never gets the chance. Victims of domestic violence often notice a shift in their abuser's behavior before something tragic happens. Have you or someone you know ever felt this eerie calm before the storm? Comment below. July 28, 2023. The last day of April Holt's life began like any other. The sun rose over Antioch, Tennessee. The streets outside her apartment were still quiet. Inside, the morning routine had just begun. Her 7-year-old son, Denzel, was awake. He had always been an early riser, just like his mother. There was comfort in routine, small moments of normalcy, familiar sounds, the hum of life moving forward. But something felt different that morning. The air inside the apartment was thick with something unspoken. The tension that had been simmering for weeks had reached its peak. And for April, the fresh start she had dreamed of was finally within reach. But not everyone was ready to let go. No one knows exactly how it started. Maybe it was a conversation that turned into something more. Maybe it was something as small as a glance, a tone, a reminder of the reality that Donovan refused to accept. What is certain is that it escalated. Voices rose. Words were thrown back and forth, sharp, edged with frustration, with anger. It wasn't the first time they had argued. But it would be the last. Neighbors later reported hearing muffled shouting coming from inside the apartment. Raised voices. A back and forth that they had heard before. But this time, it ended differently. There was a crash. Then silence. No one called for help. No one knocked on the door. No one knew that inside that apartment, a life was being taken. At 7 years old, a child should never have to understand the difference between life and death. But that morning, Denzel saw something no child should ever have to see. He had been in his room when the yelling stopped. At first, he thought maybe things had finally calmed down. Maybe his parents had just needed a moment to breathe. But then, something told him to check. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was fear. Whatever it was, it led him to the bathroom door. He stood there for a moment, listening. Nothing. Not a sound. He lowered himself to the floor, pressing his small hands against the cool wood, peering underneath. That's when he saw them. His mother's feet. Motionless. He didn't move. He didn't speak. His mind tried to make sense of what he was seeing. His mother never just lay on the floor like that. She always moved, always talked, always had something to say. But she wasn't moving now. His breath caught in his throat. He waited. Listened. Still nothing. And then. A voice behind him. Calm. Almost casual. Go check on your mom. He turned. His father was standing there. Watching him, something in his voice was off. Denzel hesitated. He didn't want to. But he obeyed. With small, uncertain hands, he reached for the bathroom door. It was locked. He tried again. Pushed harder. This time, it gave way. And inside, he found her. His mother was on the floor. A plastic bag was taped around her head. He took a step forward. His small fingers clenched into fists. She wasn't moving. She wasn't breathing. He wanted to call out to her. To shake her. To wake her up. But something inside him told him that it wouldn't make a difference. She was gone. The woman who had held his hand when he was scared, the woman who had tucked him into bed every night, who had promised him that no matter what, she would always be there, was gone. And the person who had told him to open that door was standing in the other room. Waiting. What was he waiting for? A reaction? A cry? Or just confirmation that his plan had worked? Donovan sent 7-year-old Denzel to witness the incident. But, do you think Donovan is right to send 7-year-old Denzel to witness the incident? To see his mother's lifeless body? If you believe this is wrong unless he's not aware of what happened to her, subscribe to this channel. If you believe he's right, he can tell us why in the comments below. The moment first responders arrived at the Holt residence, a decision had already been made. Not based on evidence. Not based on witness statements. Not based on facts. But on convenience. A woman found unresponsive in her bathroom. A plastic bag sealed tightly around her head. A divorce just filed. A husband with an explanation that required no further questions. By the time the first officers stepped inside, the narrative had already been written. A tragic end to a struggling marriage. A woman who couldn't take it anymore. A mother who had given up. A suicide. April's death was officially classified within hours. No lengthy investigation. No second opinions. No consideration that this may have been anything other than what it appeared to be. The police were quick to accept the story they had been handed. A woman overwhelmed by life. A husband who had simply been in another room. Case closed. But not everything was so simple. There were glaring inconsistencies. When the medical examiner's report was released, it was supposed to bring clarity. But instead, it revealed disturbing details that should have changed everything. There were bruises on April's neck. Bruises on her ankles. Signs of pressure. Of force. But somehow, this was ignored. The evidence was right there. It was visible. Undeniable. And yet, nothing was done. The authorities claimed there were no signs of a struggle. But how could that be true? How does a person restrain their own ankles before taping a bag over their head? How does someone tightly secure plastic around their face and leave no room to panic, no room to pull it away? And then there was the plastic bag itself. It was a crucial piece of evidence. It held the answers to what had happened in April's final moments. And yet, it was never tested. Not for fingerprints. Not for DNA. Not for anything at all. It was treated as insignificant. And perhaps most disturbing of all, the only person in the apartment at the time of April's death, the man who stood outside the bathroom door and told his son to check on her, was never considered a suspect. While the police were content to move on, there was one person who refused to accept their version of events. Jamie Dickerson. April's mother. A woman who had raised her. Who knew her better than anyone. And who knew, without a doubt, that her daughter did not do this to herself. Jamie had always been April's protector. From the time she was a little girl, to when she became a mother herself, Jamie had always been there. And she was not about to stop now. When the police told her it was suicide, she refused to believe them. When they told her there were no signs of foul play, she demanded answers. When they tried to close the case, she began her own investigation. Because if the system wouldn't bring justice, she would. She requested copies of reports, asked for second opinions, combed through every single detail the authorities had brushed aside. And the more she found, the more certain she became. Her daughter had not taken her own life. She had been murdered. But getting anyone to listen would be a battle of its own. Because when the system fails, when the ones meant to protect choose convenience over truth, who do you turn to? The police had decided April's story was over. But Jamie was about to prove it had only just begun. Jamie Dickerson had never been the kind of woman to back down. Not when it came to her daughter. Not when it came to the truth. And certainly not when the people who were supposed to deliver justice had already turned their backs. The police had dismissed everything. The bruises. The inconsistencies. The words of a 7-year-old boy who had witnessed something no child should ever have to see. But Jamie? She would not be ignored. She studied the reports. She examined the autopsy findings. She pored over every single document the authorities had barely glanced at before signing off on their ruling. And then, she made a request. She asked for the forensic evidence to be reviewed. And what came back changed everything. The plastic bag. The tape. The two most important pieces of evidence in April's death. The two things that should have been tested from the beginning. And when they were, the results were undeniable. There were fingerprints. One set. Not April's. Donovan's. It was the first hard proof that April had not done this to herself. And yet, it still wasn't enough. Because evidence alone wasn't going to bring justice. She needed something more. She needed a confession. Jamie had spent months piecing together the truth. She had the forensic proof. She had the autopsy findings. She had the testimony of a child who had seen it all. But what she needed now, was to hear it from Donovan himself. So she confronted him. Face to face. I know what you did. At first, he denied it. As expected. The same man who had sat in his apartment that morning. The same man who had remained so calm, so collected, even after his wife's lifeless body was found on the floor. The same man who had told his son, his own 7-year-old child, to go look at what he had done. He denied. He deflected. Until he didn't. Until Jamie pushed him to the breaking point. Until she laid out everything in front of him, the bruises, the fingerprints, the timeline that didn't add up. And then, something cracked. His words changed. His voice shifted. And just like that, he admitted it. He had strangled April. In a fit of rage. And then he staged the scene. Made it look like something it wasn't. Made it look like she had done this to herself. And then, as if that wasn't enough, as if the weight of his actions wasn't already unbearable, he made his own son walk into that bathroom. Made him see what he had done. The moment Jamie had first heard what had happened that morning, one detail stood out. One thing that never sat right. Donovan hadn't just killed April. He had orchestrated the discovery. Made sure that his son, his own 7-year-old child, was the first to find his mother's lifeless body. This wasn't just murder. This was a calculated decision. And that decision, it changed Denzel forever. Imagine being a child and hearing those words from your own father, "Go check on your mom." Imagine opening the door and seeing the only parent you have left lying on the floor, never to wake up again. Imagine knowing what you saw, and then watching as the world refused to believe you. Because that's exactly what happened. For an entire year, Denzel told the truth. And for an entire year, the people who were supposed to listen ignored him. But now, they couldn't ignore it anymore. The confession was on record. The forensic evidence was indisputable. And the police, who had been so quick to close the case, were finally forced to reopen it. But would they make it right? Would the justice system deliver what April Holt and her family deserved? Or had too much time already been lost? Because a confession is one thing. But accountability? That's something else entirely. Why do you think Donovan confessed? Guilt, pressure, or something else? Share your thoughts below. For months, Jamie Dickerson had fought against silence. Against a justice system that had failed her daughter from the very beginning. Against the authorities who refused to question what was right in front of them. And now, finally, something was changing. April Holt's death was no longer classified as a suicide. The case that had been closed in a matter of hours, the case that authorities had been so quick to dismiss, was officially reopened. And in early 2024, the medical examiner made a statement that should have been made from day one. April Holt's cause of death was no longer listed as self-inflicted. It was now ruled exactly what it had always been, homicide. But getting the truth acknowledged was only the first battle, because justice? That was something far more complicated. The man who had walked free for months, the man who had built his life on a lie, was finally taken into custody. Not in Tennessee. Not in the place where he had ended April's life. But in San Antonio, Texas. He had fled. Left the state. Started over. While April's family mourned. While her children tried to make sense of a world without their mother. While her 7-year-old son, the only person who had seen the truth from the very start, was forced to live with the horror of being ignored. Donovan was arrested and extradited back to Tennessee. It was the moment April's family had been waiting for. The moment they thought justice would finally be served. But the legal system had other plans. When the charges were announced, April's family expected one thing. Murder. Because that's what this was. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a moment of carelessness or recklessness. This was the deliberate killing of a woman who had tried to leave. A crime that was staged to look like something else. A crime that could have gone unpunished forever had it not been for Jamie's relentless pursuit of the truth. But instead of murder, the prosecution made a different decision. Donovan Holt was charged with reckless homicide. Not premeditated. Not intentional. Reckless. As if April's life had been taken by mistake. As if the bruises on her body, the evidence of force, the careful staging of the scene, the plastic bag wrapped and taped around her face. As if any of that had been an accident. If the legal system thought this fight was over, they were wrong. Jamie had fought against an entire system to have her daughter's case reopened. She had fought to have the autopsy changed. To have Donovan arrested. To make sure April's story was told the way it should have been from the beginning. And she wasn't going to stop now. She began pushing for the charges to be upgraded, to reflect the crime for what it truly was. She demanded that the case be tried not as reckless homicide, but as murder. The community rallied behind her. Petitions circulated. People across the country who had followed April's case began calling for justice. Because this wasn't just about one woman. This was about how easily cases like this are dismissed. How quickly authorities accept a version of events that's easier than the truth. How often victims are silenced, even in death. Jamie wasn't just fighting for April. She was fighting for every woman who had been told to just move on. For every case that had been closed too soon. For every family that had been forced to accept a lie instead of justice. And for one little boy, the one person who had always known the truth. The fight wasn't over. Because justice isn't about what's easy, it's about what's right. Do you think this was an accident or premeditated murder? Let's talk. April Holt is gone. Her laughter no longer fills a room. Her voice, once so full of encouragement, is now just an echo in the memories of those who loved her. Her presence, once a force of strength, has been reduced to stories told in past tense. She didn't get to watch her children grow. She didn't get to see the business she worked so hard for flourish into something greater. She didn't get the future she had been fighting for. And for what? Because she wanted to leave, because she wanted to start over. Because she believed she deserved a life free from fear. April's name should have never been in the headlines. She should have been here, living the life she had envisioned, raising her children, pushing forward. Instead, she became another statistic. Another woman failed by the very system that was supposed to protect her. Another victim whose cries for help were ignored, until it was too late. But her story is not over. Because the people who loved her have made sure of that. Denzel and Serenity lost their mother in a way no child should ever have to. One of them saw her take her last breath. The other is left with only memories and questions. Two children who should have been able to grow up in the safety of their mother's arms, now forced to navigate a world without her. But they are not letting her name fade into the background. They are not letting her story be forgotten. Instead, they are using their pain to bring something good into the world, something that will help others who find themselves in the same situation April did. Together, Denzel and Serenity launched Hugs from Heaven, a charity dedicated to helping children who have lost a parent to domestic violence. Through this initiative, they are turning tragedy into hope. For every child who has had to face life without a mother. For every family that has suffered in silence. For every person who thought they were alone in their grief. They are ensuring that their mother's story is not just another case file, but a catalyst for change. A voice for those who can no longer speak. A lifeline for those still trapped in situations they feel they cannot escape. As the legal battle continued, as the fight for stronger charges waged on, April's daughter, a child robbed of a future with her mother, did something that no one expected. She wrote a letter. A plea. Not just to the courts. Not just to the prosecutors. But to everyone watching. To the people who had followed her mother's story. To the judges who held the power to deliver real justice. To the world that had seen her mother's name but didn't know her the way she did. In that letter, she poured out everything. The pain. The confusion. The anger. The questions that would never have answers. And above all else, the demand for justice. Because no child should have to grow up knowing the person responsible for their mother's death got to walk free. No daughter should have to write a letter begging the courts to do what should have been done from the very beginning. And yet, that's exactly what she did. A letter written with a child's hands, but carrying a weight far beyond her years. Justice may never bring April back. It won't undo the years stolen from her children. It won't erase the pain left in its wake. It won't change the fact that a little boy was forced to witness something no child should ever have to see. But it can still mean something. It can still be a warning. To every woman who is told to just give it time. To every friend who has noticed something off but didn't want to interfere. To every mother, sister, daughter, or friend who has had that feeling in their gut that something wasn't right, but ignored it because they didn't want to believe what it meant. April's story should never have ended this way. But maybe, just maybe, it can save someone else. Because there is one thing that cannot be erased, no matter how many times the system tries to close the case. The truth. And the truth is this: April Holt did not take her own life. She was stolen from the people who loved her. She was taken by a man who refused to let her go. She was silenced by a system that didn't care to listen. And the only reason we know the truth today? Because her family refused to stay silent. Because her son never changed his story. Because her mother refused to accept a lie. Because the people who truly loved April Holt fought, and will keep fighting. The question now is, will justice finally be served? Or will the system fail her again? And now, I ask you, what do you think? Should Donovan Holt face life in prison for what he did? Do you think the justice system will fail April again? What do you believe should happen next? Let me know in the comments below. And if you believe April Holt's story deserves to be heard, if you believe no victim should be ignored, if you believe that justice should not be a privilege but a right, then subscribe, and share this video. Because the more people who see this, the harder it is to ignore. The more voices we have, the louder we become. And the louder we become, the closer we get to justice. For April. For her children. For every person who has ever been told to stay silent. Thank you for watching. Stay aware. Stay safe. And never stop fighting for the truth.